Does your relationship feel more like a burden than a blessing? Is your partner a source of emotional stability or a cause of constant turmoil? These are the questions we often avoid but must face if we are to live a life of true fulfillment and peace. Today, I want to share with you a perspective rooted in the timeless wisdom of Stoicism, a philosophy that teaches us to seek tranquility and wisdom in the face of life's challenges. We will explore the 11 signs that it might be time to end a relationship, all through the lens of Stoic philosophy. Imagine this. You're in a relationship where every day feels like a struggle. You're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid conflicts that seem inevitable. Your partner's words and actions leave you feeling drained and unappreciated. This was the reality for a man called John. John was in a relationship for 10 years. At first, everything seemed perfect. But as time passed, subtle signs of emotional manipulation and neglect began to surface. He found himself compromising his values and neglecting his own needs to keep the peace. He felt trapped, questioning his worth, and losing sight of his own happiness. One day, John came across the teachings of Stoicism. He read about the importance of living in accordance with virtue and wisdom, and the need to cultivate inner peace. It was a revelation for him. He began to see his relationship through a new lens, one that valued his own well-being and growth. John started to notice the signs that his relationship was no longer serving him. 1. Emotional turmoil. John realized that his relationship was a constant source of stress and anxiety, disrupting his inner tranquility. Every conversation felt like navigating a minefield, with arguments erupting over minor issues. This continuous emotional turbulence took a toll on his mental health, leaving him in a perpetual state of unease and frustration. 2. Compromised values. He noticed how often he compromised his core values to avoid conflict. John valued honesty and integrity, but he found himself frequently bending the truth or hiding his feelings to prevent disagreements. This misalignment with his principles caused a growing sense of dissatisfaction and internal conflict. 3. Lack of respect. John saw that his partner frequently disrespected his boundaries and belittled his feelings. Whenever he tried to express his needs or concerns, his partner dismissed them as insignificant or overly sensitive. This lack of respect eroded his self-worth and made him feel undervalued. 4. Personal growth stagnation. He acknowledged that his relationship was hindering his personal and spiritual growth. John had dreams and aspirations, but his partner showed little interest in supporting or encouraging them. Instead, he felt trapped in a cycle of routine and stagnation, unable to pursue his passions or develop new skills. 5. Manipulation and control. John identified patterns of manipulation and control that eroded his self-esteem. His partner often used guilt trips and emotional blackmail to get their way, making John feel responsible for their happiness and well-being. This manipulation left him feeling powerless and dependent. 6. Emotional draining. He felt emotionally exhausted and drained after interactions with his partner. Instead of feeling uplifted and supported, John felt depleted and overwhelmed. The constant emotional labor required to maintain the relationship left him with little energy for himself or other important areas of his life. 7. Lack of reciprocity. John realized that the relationship lacked mutual respect and effort. He was always the one initiating conversations, making plans, and putting in the effort to resolve conflicts. His partner's lack of reciprocation made the relationship feel one-sided and unbalanced, leading to feelings of resentment. 8. Isolation. He noticed how isolated he had become from his friends and support network. His partner's possessive behavior and constant need for attention had gradually distanced him from those who mattered most to him. He found himself increasingly alone, without the support and companionship of his friends and family. 9. Loss of joy. John recognized that his sense of joy and contentment had diminished significantly. Activities he once enjoyed felt like chores, and the relationship that was supposed to bring happiness instead brought sorrow. He missed the feeling of genuine happiness and fulfillment that he once had. 10. Constant conflict. He saw that conflicts were frequent and unresolved, leading to ongoing resentment. Arguments often ended without resolution, leaving a trail of hurt and anger. This constant state of conflict prevented any meaningful communication or understanding, creating a hostile environment. 11. Intuition ignored. John admitted that he had been ignoring his intuition, which had been telling him for a long time that something was wrong. Deep down, he knew that the relationship was unhealthy, but fear and doubt kept him from acting on that intuition. Recognizing and trusting his inner voice became a crucial step toward reclaiming his life. John made a courageous decision. He chose to end the relationship. It wasn't easy. It required immense strength and resilience. The decision weighed heavily on his mind as he battled feelings of guilt and fear of the unknown. He knew it would be painful, but he also understood that his well-being and future happiness depended on this difficult choice. He started by seeking support from trusted friends and family. John confided in those who had always stood by him, sharing his struggles and the decision he was about to make. Their encouragement and understanding provided him with the emotional fortitude he needed to take the next step. John then sat down with his partner for an honest and heartfelt conversation. He expressed his feelings clearly and calmly, explaining the impact their relationship had on his mental and emotional health. He communicated his need for personal growth and inner peace, emphasizing that ending the relationship was a necessary step for both of them to find true happiness. Despite his partner's initial resistance and attempts to convince him otherwise, John remained firm in his decision, guided by the clarity of his newfound Stoic principles. In the days and weeks that followed, John focused on rebuilding his life. He moved out of the shared living space, finding a place of his own where he could start fresh. The transition was challenging, filled with moments of doubt and sadness, but John stayed committed to his path. Through this process, John rediscovered himself. He immersed himself in activities that brought him joy and fulfillment. He reconnected with old hobbies that he had neglected, such as painting and hiking. He also explored new interests, like meditation and reading philosophical texts, which helped him deepen his understanding of Stoicism and its application in everyday life. John found peace in solitude, appreciating the quiet moments where he could reflect and grow without the constant pressure of a tumultuous relationship. He began to enjoy his own company, realizing that his happiness did not depend on another person, but on his own state of mind. He also rekindled relationships with friends and family, rebuilding the support network that had been weakened during his toxic relationship. These connections provided him with a sense of belonging and love, reminding him that he was not alone on his journey. As John focused on his passions and personal growth, he discovered a newfound strength in his convictions. He became more assertive, confident in his values and the boundaries he set for himself. This inner strength allowed him to approach future relationships with a clearer understanding of what he needed and deserved. John's story is a testament to the power of self-awareness and the courage to make difficult decisions. By ending a relationship that no longer served him, he opened the door to a life filled with joy, growth, and tranquility. Let John's journey inspire us all to prioritize our well-being, trust our inner wisdom, and have the courage to let go of what no longer serves us. My friends, ending a relationship can be one of the most challenging decisions we face. But remember, as Stoicism teaches us, we must prioritize our inner tranquility and wisdom. If a relationship is causing you more pain than joy, more conflict than peace, it might be time to let go. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up by hitting the like button below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more content like this, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Thanks for being a part of our Modern Stoic Minds community.